I am delighted to be with you today to talk about a very important problem that modern society faces, which is how do we deal with the marketing of all of the wireless devices today, and the fact that the way these devices are being marketed is truly a betrayal of public health and the environment. And I come to you today as someone who spent 5 decades doing research on public health. I was the director at the National Academy of Sciences when that group was tasked with the challenging question of, is it safe to smoke in the environments of children and on airplanes? And I'm proud to say that I was a leader of one of the groups that said we should not allow smoking on planes or around children because it can endanger their health. And that was at a time when the data were being questioned by industry, well-funded scientists, some of whom worked at major institutions like Harvard and Yale, and took money from the tobacco industry. I also worked as a presidential appointee of President Clinton, and I've worked with the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, and a number of institutions. The group that I work with now, Environmental Health Trust, has a distinguished history. Unfortunately, Ronald Herbermann and David Servan-Schreiber are no longer with us, but you'll see that my executive director, Theodora Scarato, is very capable leader of the efforts that we have underway today to identify risks that can be controlled and can be addressed. And we include among our advisors, Frank Clegg, who was the CEO of Microsoft of Canada and is now the CEO of Canadians for Safe Technology, as well as Paul Benny-Shai from Israel, Ronald Melnick in the United States, Professor Anthony Miller, a distinguished physician who's published over 600 articles, and Claudio Fernandez, a young associate professor who is an expert in electrical engineering and whose work I'm going to feature today. But before getting into the work on wireless radiation, I want to take a moment and remind you that advertising has played a major role. This is a very beautiful image. Unfortunately, it's a beautiful image of a form of child abuse. You would not give babies sugar soda to drink nowadays. But that is in fact what was done in order to promote the idea that sugar was a good thing for babies. We know now that's ridiculous. Other advertisements, also look how beautifully it's packaged here, said light a lucky and you'll never miss sweets. In other words, if you want to suppress your appetite, just smoke some tobacco. It actually works, but of course it leaves you with a history to look forward to of lung cancer and heart disease and other serious problems. Again, marketing here has been key. Even doctors were involved. In this ad came from the Journal of the American Medical Association. And it said, give your throat a vacation, smoke a fresh cigarette. A ridiculous idea, but again, promoted through advertising so that people were made to feel that smoking was a good thing and doctors did it as well. Even children's feet were not exempt from this, and this was promoting x-rays of the feet as a way to see that the shoes fit. Again, advertising played a role in promoting what we now know is a very dangerous practice because younger children being exposed to radiation from x-rays puts them at risk of a host of diseases, as we now know from what I'm going to show you about the invisible microwave radiation from cell phones and other devices. The cell phone is now ubiquitous. There are more than 7 billion phones in the world today, and not a single one of them has been subjected to safety testing for the question that our group is asking. What is the long-term impact on health and the environment from young children using cell phones, starting sometimes as infants? What we can say today is more money is spent on developing this attractive advertising than on research. There is almost no independent research being carried out today, except notably, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy is one of the world leaders in this and has produced studies showing that current levels of cell phone radiation, of radiation from base stations, can affect the health of animals exposed under controlled conditions, giving them an increase of very rare tumors And this work has been confirmed by the National Toxicology Program as well. What we know about radiofrequency radiation limits is that they have not changed in a quarter of a century. Every device you're using today, the things that are maybe in your pockets, on your lap, next to your brain, have only been tested for one thing. Do they heat up the brain or the body after an exposure as short as 6 minutes? It does not take into account the exposures that take place over long periods of time that you may all have. What we know about the standards for radiation limits is not only are they out of date, but they never took into account the impact of non-ionizing radiation, microwave radiation that comes from all of the devices we're using now. They never asked the impact of these devices and this radiation on pregnancy, on the developing brains of children. Think of how much effort goes into protecting children today with seatbelts and airbags and bicycle helmets and ski helmets, and yet we do nothing to protect them from microwave radiation. We also failed in setting these standards to take into account new evidence that I'm going to show you in a moment about the impact of this radiation on insects and trees. Most importantly, we live in a world in a sea of exposure to toxic chemicals and microwave radiation. And what we know, again from studies at the Ramazzini Institute and elsewhere, is that the combined effects of microwave radiation and heavy metals and toxic chemicals is much greater than the effects of any one agent alone. Synergistic effects are key and have never been addressed by the groups that set standards. The International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection that has set standards for much of the world is a club that is invitation only and self-monitored, has long-standing ties to industry. And so I'm part of a number of experts that dissent and do not agree with these limits and are working to develop new ones that will be appropriately reflecting what we know about the effects on pregnancy, the developing brain, and the environment. We are part of a group of now over 400 scientists that are calling for a ban on 5G until there has been a full evaluation of all of the health damages that have been documented both in animals and humans from cell phone radiation. And these damaging effects have occurred at levels below those that are currently allowed. Cell phone radiation penetrates much more deeply into critically important organs of the brain of a child. In fact, we've shown 30 times more absorption into the hippocampus, 10 times more absorption into the bone marrow of the skull. The fact that we are exposing children to this radiation makes no sense when we take all the efforts that we do to protect their brains otherwise. Children absorb more radiation, they're developmentally more vulnerable, and we need to protect them from this radiation, as a number of governments have recognized recently. This is a simulation done by Claudio Fernandez, Alvaro de Sales, and our colleagues at Porto Alegre, Brazil. And what it shows, this radiation as it goes into the brain just from a Wi-Fi tablet that a 6-year-old is looking at. This is the effect of the brain if the tablet's in front of the child. If the tablet is on the body of the child, of course, the radiation is going through and to the developing reproductive system, as well as the gastrointestinal system. So we can see from modeling studies that are based on very sophisticated imaging developed for the Food and Drug Administration, that this radiation gets well into the brain of the child when the child is using an iPad. This next image shows you the absorption of the radiation that gets into the testis and the reproductive organ of a male with the phone in the pocket. And as you can see, if you look carefully at this image, the highest radiation gets into the penis. Radiation is also getting into the colon, into the rectum, and that's important. The Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic, experts in male infertility, one of the first things they say to men who come and are having trouble getting their wives pregnant when they want to, is get the phone and other devices off your body. As the Cleveland Clinic wrote in 2016, it's best to keep your cell phone as far from the testis as you can. This is a study which was done with human sperm, with laptops connected to Wi-Fi that were not generating heat. So there was no heat, because we know that heat can damage sperm. And what you see on the left is that the unexposed sperm in the white box have a very small amount of DNA damage, DNA fragmentation. That's the white box. If you look at the black box, it's 3 times more DNA damage. And this was just from 2 hours of Wi-Fi exposure. Now, no matter how much exposure you have had till now, if you stop exposing your reproductive organs to Wi-Fi radiation, there's good evidence for DNA repair. But it's important, especially, that young people and young people trying to get pregnant are aware of the need to protect their reproductive organs. One of the puzzles we have in cancer research today is, why are more young people getting colorectal cancer? People under the age of 40. In the United States, Iran, England, there are increases in rectal cancer that cannot be explained. We've recently published a paper with Professor Anthony Miller where we say that one possible explanation, and in fact, as far as we know, the only one we can imagine, for this dramatic 4-fold increase in rectal cancer in the last decade in young adults in these countries is exposure to cell phone radiation. And experimental studies carried out by colleagues in Iran have shown that colorectal cancer cells are exquisitely sensitive to radiofrequency radiation. This means that when you take already existing cancer cells of the colon and expose them to cell phone radiation, you radically accelerate their growth. Other studies have looked at teenagers, studies done by the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute led by Martin Rusli, and they have shown that when looking at a group of 7th through 9th graders, that they take information on the record of their cell phone use, and they showed that there is a definite increase in damage to their memory, with the children that use the phones the most having the most damage to their memory. And the study was replicated and strengthened by findings that were produced in 2018 on decreased memory performance. Something to think about the next time you can't remember where your keys are, or you're trying to drive your car and forget which way you're supposed to go. The Indian research team has done studies on DNA damage, taking blood from people who live closer to mobile phone base stations. And what they found was that those who live closer to mobile phone base stations had up to 3 times more damage to their DNA, and they were exposed to levels of radiofrequency radiation that are far below those that are allowed by the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. Now, the effects that we've seen from this radiation are not limited solely to experiments on rats or to studies on children. Now, most recently, colleagues at the Swiss Institute that does some of the top work in the world has shown that if you expose the body of a honeybee to the kind of radiation that can come from phones today and will come from future devices when 5G is fully implemented, that this could change insect behavior because it resonates perfectly with the body of the insect. As you can see here in 24 gigahertz, which are frequencies that would be allowed under 5G, the entire body of the insect is lit up with exposure. And insects are not the only part of the environment we're concerned about. A series of studies conducted by colleagues in Germany and Central Europe has found significant tree damage caused by mobile phone base stations. In this image here, these are the mobile phone base stations over on the far left. And here is a tree. And if you look carefully at the tree, there's a thinning of the crown of the tree. And after another 10 years, if continuation of exposure occurs, where the side of the tree is facing the mass of the base station, this tree could die. You can see the levels of radiation on the healthy side of the tree are much lower, 10 times lower than on this side, and the consequences are quite evident. Now, one of the other problems with 5G that has been identified by a number of experts in energy is that it is an energy hog, an energy vampire. And even though there will be gains in efficiency, what we know from the Chinese experience so far is that the gain in efficiency will be swamped by the increase in demand. There'll be so much greater demand with 50 billion new devices that are anticipated to be marketed that you will not save energy. And in fact, you'll need more energy. Studies, which you can find on our website, show that the 5G system uses between 3 to 10 times more energy for each base station. And you'll have millions more base stations created in order for 5G to work, with billions of new devices. Most recently, a group of several hundred French experts have added their voice to the call to stop 5G solely because of its energy consumption. And we agree that that's a major concern. In my book, Disconnect: The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation, I explain why most of you don't know more about this problem. It's not an accident. The cell phone industry has war-gamed the science. I document this in a book that was written a decade ago. I've shown you today that government limits don't take into account the fact that there's a damaging effect on memory, there's damaging effect on sperm, there's damaging effect on pregnancy that I haven't been able to show you here that you can find on our website. War games is what's involved, and here's an example of some of them. Telstra annual report shows families using devices, having children hold the devices on their bodies in exactly the ways that we've shown are unsafe. And these devices are not tested for children. They're tested with a 220-pound guy, and none of them tells you that they're not really safe for children close to their bodies, although many governments are now issuing warnings about that, including the government of France and Belgium and Israel, which point out that these devices should never be kept close to the bodies of children. And yet we have the marketing of the devices with no awareness of the need to protect children. As you see here in the games, the kids are being encouraged to play. You see the phone directly on the body of dad with his beard, and it's going right into his thigh. And on our website, we have a video from a brave woman who's sharing her story of what has happened because she kept her device on her thigh and she developed a rare malignancy as a consequence of it. This is the marketing that's going on. For Christmas, after all, that is a young toddler with a virtual reality headset on their brain, putting that radiation right into their thinner skulls and rapidly growing brain cells. This is contrary to what the American Academy of Pediatrics advises. These are some of the fine print warnings that come with these devices that most people never see. They're in the device. They're in the operating system. That's where we took this information from. It says the device should be used more than 20 centimeters from the body when wireless devices are on. Otherwise, you can exceed the exposure guidelines. These are some further examples of the dark side of marketing. They're promoting the use by young children, by people of reproductive age, keeping Wi-Fi radiation close to the reproductive organs. I don't know why anyone would want to go to the beach to check out their devices. This cute bunny is obviously a children's toy. It's obviously designed for kids. Kids put things in their mouths, but this bunny has a little secret. It is a wireless speaker. Why would you want to have a baby snuggling with a wireless device? It makes no sense. It violates all the recommendations of the manufacturers, and yet there's no control over the marketing of wireless radiation exposures to children. I find it horrifying, and I hope you do too. Now, in Belgium, it's against the law to sell phones like these designed for children. It is illegal to do this for children under the age of 7, but I think that it should not be permitted to encourage children to use cell phones except for emergencies. And I think they need to know how to do that, but they should not have their own phones and certainly should not be carrying it close to their bodies. Another explanation for the problem, besides the war games, is the fact that if you look at the FCC and you look in Italy right now to those who are in charge of regulating the telecom industry, they come from the industry they are regulating. It is a revolving door. That is why a Harvard University report called the Federal Communications Commission a captured agency with the hardball tactics of big tobacco. As most of you know, it's no longer legal to advertise tobacco in the ways that I showed you at the beginning of my talk. It's illegal in many countries, including Turkey, where tobacco originated. And in the 1990s, the executives of the largest tobacco companies swore to the US Congress that they did not have evidence of the dangers of tobacco at the time. And they were convicted of racketeering by a federal court for having made that false testimony, for having supported research that would make tobacco appear to be safe, and for having a massive marketing campaign targeting minorities, targeting women, and targeting children to promote the use of this dangerous product. Today, we have a similar situation where the industry claims there's no evidence of harm, but they're concerned about the problem. That is actually taking a ticket from the playbook of the tobacco industry now by the telecom industry. They're following the same playbook as tobacco, and you can see that here in this video.
So be straight with me. Is it true?
It could be. No,
Well,
come
very,
on.
very
no
few cases.
proof
There
at
was
all.
an unfortunate
It's really a
incident out in
complicated
Iowa.
situation.
Look, gentlemen, practice these words in front of the mirror. Although we are constantly exploring the subject, currently, there is no direct evidence that links cell phone usage to brain cancer.
And that has been the exact model for the cell phone industry. They say we need more research, and yet there's no research funded. They say we have no evidence because they make efforts to make sure we have no evidence. In Britain, this ad about 5G, warning about its dangers, was banned. Here's another one that was banned. We at Environmental Health Trust have worked with Radiation Research Trust. They've developed a lot of these ads, brilliant work. And yet what happened when they put these up in the loo, in the public toilets, these ads, they were told they had to pull. Here's another one. How safe is your phone? And it quotes the work of the US government National Toxicology Program. It shows in the apps all of the different things that have been documented. It's a very high quality, excellent ad. And if you want to show it or share it, please do so, but know that this has been banned in Britain. Environmental Health Trust has been working with parents and teachers and citizen groups around the world to promote safer technology for children. They're very simple things you can do. Make sure that children only use wireless devices when they're disconnected from the internet, disconnected from Bluetooth and Wi-Fi off. Make sure that children know that a cell phone is not a toy, and do not give wireless devices to children to play with so long as they're connected to anything emitting radiation. We are working with schools in England and around the world that are promoting wired technology for educational purposes. We recognize children need to learn how to use the digital world, but we want them to do it in a more safe manner. We want them to know that when there are only 1 or 2 bars on a device, you should never use it unless it's an emergency, because the device will issue even more radiation in an effort to reach the signal. We want them to know that these devices should never be carried on the body, because the closer a device is to the body, the more radiation will get into the body. And we know definitely that children's brains are growing so rapidly that they need protection from seat belts, airbags, bike helmets, all of these things we protect our children with. We have to also protect them from microwave radiation from these devices. Tablets are called tablets because they belong on tables. They do not belong on our bodies or the bodies of children.
Yeah.
If you want to watch a movie or some other thing on your device with a child, for yourself, make sure you download it first, disconnect from Wi-Fi, disconnect from Bluetooth, and then watch whatever you're trying to see. That way you will reduce your wireless radiation exposure, and also you'll save bandwidth in your home. One of the problems people have increasingly is that they can't get on, or the device is working slowly. It's working slowly because there are too many things already connected to your wireless system. The best system to have is not wireless, but wired. That involves cabling that is very simple to install with a direct WireNet cable into your router. If you cannot easily do that, then please download what you want and then disconnect from the internet, from Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, so that you can safely watch whatever you're trying to see. And I look forward to working with you as we develop more powerful ways to show people what we know now and what we need to do to ensure that our children grow up in a healthier and safer future. Thank you.
Did you know
That cell phone, the one in your pocket, emits radio frequency radiation. As long as your phone's turned on, even if you're not talking or texting.
The American Academy of Pediatrics in over a dozen countries recommends reducing children's exposure to wireless radiation.
when using a cell phone, I always keep it away from my body. I use speakerphone or a headset like this.
To stop microwave exposure, I put my phone on airplane mode and turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth function.
I hold the phone at a distance and make sure it's not touching my body.
Cell phones are not toys. Children's brains and bodies are still developing and are vulnerable to wireless radiation. Practice safe and responsible habits with yourself and your children.
When using the computer, I always try to make sure my connection is corded, not wireless.
Remember not to use your cell phone in the car. The phone works at higher power in metal surroundings and bounces around, increasing your family's radiation exposure.
For their safety,
For your safety,
Because children are more vulnerable.
remind them.
Remind yourself.
To limit your microwave radiation exposures. Probably the most important thing I did, I was involved as a young scientist in the committee that actually reviewed the data and recommended that there be no smoking on airplanes. You may be shocked to hear that it was even a question for science at the time, but it was. And when I look at what we know now about mobile phone radiation, I see some very interesting similarities.
A growing number of prominent doctors and scientists are raising warning flags over radiation this morning, and your kids could be facing a greater risk of exposure.
I think the most important study is a study by the National Toxicology Program in a classic large carcinogenicity test, one of the largest ever performed, and for that matter, one of the most expensive. They found increased risk of the tumors which we believe radiofrequency radiation is causing in man. Particular tumors called schwannomas. In the rats, they were in the heart. In humans, they're often in the nerve, the ear nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Cell phone providers say they follow all safety guidelines put into place by the FCC. The current FCC safety standard was developed nearly 20 years ago.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I've never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
it does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting. With an iPhone, for example, it's 5/8 of an inch.
At this point, the evidence has become sufficiently strong that cell phone radiation is a human carcinogen.
A major development from California's Department of Public Health. High use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects, including brain cancer and tumors, lower sperm counts, headaches, and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep.
If it was a real problem, I would know. If it was a real problem, the government would protect us. How come I'm not hearing about this? They're all things I've heard when I give seminars. You know, I get up there and they say, oh yeah, if this was really a problem, they would have told us. I am they. I am a, legitimate scientist, and I am telling you.